John Goad, my brother, man. Welcome to Dad Edge, my friend.
Hey, Larry, so good to be with you today. Thank you.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I, I'm excited for this conversation. Just to give the men some context, obviously, they heard your introduction in the intro. Obviously, a successful business owner, married, kids, all these things going on. You're a part of our accelerator program. But I really want to start with, your childhood, how you grew up, and even the relationship with your own dad.
Oh, yeah. So we lived in Illinois. I was born in Illinois when I was a kid. I was typical Midwestern.
What part?
Born in Hinsdale. So that's a suburb of Chicago. Then we moved to central Illinois. We lived in Kewanee. We lived near the Quad Cities, in Morton, Illinois. Kind of moved around a little bit, but I was a typical, wear cutoffs and black cowboy boots and run around in the woods kind of kid. And I have one sister who's a year younger than me, and just a lot of adventures. What I remember, a lot of hot sticky nights, in the summer too. But we lived there through grade school, and then we ended up moving to Utah, and that was a huge adventure. That was the opening of the West to us, and it was amazing. And my relationship with my father, he was a very stern guy. He's a man of faith and discipline, and I loved my dad. I still love he's still around. He's 92, and he's a wonderful friend. But I have great memories of things that he did to lead our family that I didn't know at the time were going to impress upon me, just lessons. So.
Yeah. What were some of those lessons, by the way, you mentioned he was this good mixture of a faith-based man, but also very strict and stern. But what were some of the lessons that you remember growing up that you still actually value today and probably been using for years?
Wow. One of the things, Dad would, he would get angry. He's, German kind of guy. And he would get angry, but he would recover quickly, I guess. So, he would deliver punishment quick, and then it was over. He would forgive, and it was just gone. There was no remnant of it, no holding anything back. And that's something I can recall from my earliest age. I was talking to him the other day. I remember being chased. Gosh, I had been just really small, and he was running after me. I did something, to give me a swat. And I just remember that, he'd dish out a swat, but it was done. And I took that to heart. I've struggled with anger when I was younger in the past, and, still that's a thing sometimes, but it's so important to just let it go.
It's interesting you bring this up, because it's awesome that you were raised like that, because I remember how I was raised. And, listen, I share this because, my parents are, it was crazy, right? But I think parents do the best job that they possibly can with the information that they have, even if the job is not optimal, right? And I remember my mom in particular, when she would get mad at me, like it would last sometimes days. Like I'd get like the silent treatment for days. And, I remember like getting in trouble and then dreading like that I could be cut off from communication for days. And so she did not do a good job of letting things go quickly. But I also think that had a lot to do with how she was brought up, because I think that's how she was brought up. Because I know that my grandmother, God rest her soul, great woman, but I think that when she was triggered to anger, that's how she handled things, and that's how my mom handled things. My own son, one of my kids, my 8-year-old, because I would say, I don't know how you are with your kids, but that's probably how my kids would describe me. Is, I'm this combination of empathy and connection and love, but I'm tough at the same time, and I can get angry, right? And my 8-year-old in particular, like he got in trouble. Or, I'm sorry, my 6-year-old got in trouble, and he, like, I think 15 minutes went by and it wasn't even that big of a deal. And I noticed he was kind of pouting, and I was like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Are you still mad at me?" I'm like, "Oh my God, no, not at all. Why?" And he's like, "I just didn't know if you were still mad at me." I was like, "When do I ever stay mad at you?" I was like, "I think we can all agree that dad stays mad for 10 minutes and then I'm done. I'm over it. Right. We're done.
Right.
We moved on to the next thing." And even at 6 years old, he's like, "Yeah, that sounds right." Right. Yeah, that sounds about right. But that's cool, man.
Yeah.
How has this impacted you as a dad? Do you find that you are maybe that combination of like compassion, love, and then also maybe some tough love and some serious strict boundaries?
Yeah, it's funny. I would like to think that. Here's the interesting thing is that um, some of those lessons from dad, carry with me, but we all have our own journey. We all have our own, we add ourselves into the mix too. Right. And so kind of reflecting back when my kids were young, and they're older now, 22 and 16. And so, but when they were younger, I was actually traveling a fair amount. And so, I'd be gone for a few days and I'd come home for a few days, and kind of got into that whole mix. And my wife used to say, "Oh, you're the fun loving daddy." And what I found was I kind of get into this cycle where, she was at home all the time. And then I would come back to town, and, the kids would want to see, happy and all that. And it was hard for me to issue discipline or to be as probably strict as I had desired to be in some areas. And that caused I think, a little bit of problem there for a while. But after identifying that, and I think working together with my wife and praying about it and whatnot, we were able to kind of get into a little different place to where I was taking on the role that I needed to, and helping reinforce what Michelle, my wife, had laid down while I was gone, but then also stepping in, when I get back to town, and make certain that that I was consistent with the kids. Does that make any sense?
That makes total sense. And that's really cool. And how long have you been married for?
I'll be 30 years this August. So
30 years.
I know, man. Is
Wait,
that crazy?
30
Yeah.
years. Okay. Okay. And what's her name again?
Michelle. Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Michelle. Um,
Yeah. I
I
know.
say, I say it like that because, dude, we have, and my neighbors might be listening to this show. So we have these neighbors, and the mom's name is Michelle, and their boys are 5 and 8, and it's really kind of odd. They don't call her mom. They call her Michelle, which is, it's sort of, we scratch our heads at that one, but it's just, it's the dynamic of their family. But these two boys, like when they want her attention, they're like, Michelle, 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 like they just scream her name. But so 30 years and then how long did you guys date before you guys got married?
Oh, dude, we met in August the year before, and 3 months later, I asked her to marry me, and then 9 months later, we got married. So,
wow. Okay, how did you know at 3? Because if you asked her at 3 months, you were already contemplating this way before 3 months, right?
dude, I wanted to strike while the iron was hot. Actually, yeah, I was. So, quick story.
Yeah, please.
So I was a carpenter at the time, single guy carpenter, and had been out of college, and I just helped a youth group at a church in Fort Collins, Colorado. And there was a youth convention in Salt Lake City, and they needed somebody to drive the van. So I was that guy, and drove a van full of kids out there. And the first day, they had all these leaders, which calling me a leader at that time is kind of weird, but that's what we were termed. And sitting at the table, and there's this blonde gal sitting across from me, and I'm like, wow, look at that. That is amazing. And so this guy, he's a pastor, and he's talking about all this stuff that we're going to do for the weekend. It was a 3-day deal. And he said, okay, I'm going to pray for everybody. And I didn't hear what he said. I'm just kind of having my own little talk with God. I'm like, hey, is this who I'm supposed to meet? And, the hair kind of stands up on the back of my neck, and like, wow. And am I supposed to marry this girl? And, that wasn't even in my vocabulary at the time.
Yeah.
It just kind of came. And so I thought, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to make it a point to meet this young lady and just, sweep her off her feet. Well, I didn't see her the whole weekend. It was hilarious. You should hear her side of the story. It's a whole different deal. But the last day, they were going to have a service, and then we're all going to, it was like at a big conference center. And then we were going to take off after the service. And so it had started, and I had one of my kids just took off. I had to go find him. And so I found him at the arcade, I had to drag him back. And I'm thinking, well, at least I got to see that maybe there's somebody out there, for me, kind of a thing. And there were 2 seats left in the entire auditorium. And we go in and I look down and there's this blue dress and legs, and look up and it's her. And I sat 1 seat away from her, got to know her name was Michelle. And I told her, I said, hey, afterwards, I said, hey, I'd really, like to come to Colorado Springs. I found out she was from there, and take you out, for ice cream. And, my dad and I will be down there fishing, next weekend, which was a total lie, but Dad would go with me anywhere I wanted to go fishing. And so, I just hadn't made the arrangements yet. And she said, sure, here's my number, find it in the book. It's Smith,
Find it in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. She totally messed with me. Yeah.
Dude, all these millennials are gonna be like, what book?
I know. That's 100 years ago, right?
Right.
So, So then we talked a lot on the phone, and came down the next weekend, met her folks. And 3 months later, she was in school in Wisconsin then, and I flew out there to ask her to marry me. So
were you nervous?
I
mean, like, because that's a short, man. That's like a short courtship. Was there any part of you like, she might say no?
Oh, totally. But but here's the deal, man. I would call her like dorm room, and there are all these guys over there. I'm like, seriously, what are all these guys? And she's like, oh, they're just my friends. I'm like, I'm a guy. I know they're not just your friends. So I'm gonna get out there and kind of pee on some trees, mark my territory. And went out there. And after I went out, then there was never any guys in the room. It was pretty funny. So, but
you're like 7'10". Like, I mean, let's give some context to the guys who are listening to the show. Like, you're a big dude. Like,
not quite that big, but
right, but
yeah. So no, wow. It's cool, and grateful to have 30 years with the woman. She's amazing. Just amazing. Yeah.
So what has 30 years of marriage taught you?
Oh, wow. Persistence, tenacity, all these kids that meet and say we're in love. My daughter is engaged right now, and she'll be married in October, and I'm like, you don't even know what love is, and that's not condescending by any means. It's just over time, and you've been married a while too, that over time and pain and tears and joy together, that love just grows to a point that's amazing.
So, okay, I'm going to challenge you on this one.
Sure.
Because what you just said, a lot of guys are listening to this and be like, love grows. Like, come on, like there are some guys who are listening to the show who are like, man, my marriage is awesome. Right. And they're listening to this show and they're listening to this episode right now. And they're like, ooh, like, how can I make it even better? Like, because I want to be married for 30 years too. Right.
Yeah.
And there are some guys who are in a camp of like, my marriage is kind of mediocre, like, but I don't really know how to make love grow anymore. And then there are some guys who, I talk about the 3 camps a lot on this show, which are, 1/3 of couples who stay together can actually identify their relationship is working. Like, they wouldn't change a thing. They love it. Right. It's kind of like you and me. There's a second camp. It's just like, it's kind of mediocre, settling. Like, I don't really know exactly what to do next. Like, like, we're together, we don't want to be divorced, but it's not necessarily like the greatest thing in the world, but it's okay. And then there's the third camp, with the last 1/3, which is like, we're done. We're just staying together for the kids at this point. And one thing that I've learned, and I think you have too, is that love is not a feeling. I mean, it is to a point, but it's really a choice. And love is actually a verb. It's not a noun. Yeah. And once I learned that, like, love is a choice, right? I always thought that if I thought love is a choice and love is a verb, then the honeymoon phase is over. And now I have to get myself to love this woman. And nothing was further from the truth, because once I found that if I made the choice to love her, right, in the way that she receives it, that made the feeling and the connection and the communication and even the physical side of our relationship and the intimacy, like, so much better, instead of sitting back being like, well, I'm just waiting for the feeling to come back. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, I think there's a lot of people out there listening to this show that's like, man, I want to be married for 30 years and I want to be happy. So what's John doing? What are John and Michelle doing to make this happen?
Yeah. Can I say first too, that when I went into it, I didn't, you say lifelong, I'm going to be married lifelong, but you really don't know what that means. I
Yeah.
didn't when I was young. And frankly, I didn't really understand the significance of the commitment that I was making either. I was a guy that wanted to be a man of my word and all of that, but I didn't, looking back, I didn't realize what that really meant in sickness and in health and all of that. So first and foremost, we share faith, and that by far has been that we're just on an even keel there as far as that's concerned, as far as the importance in how we raise our kids and just our household, how it's run and things like that. And so that's been huge. When I get into trouble or when I find that things are faltering, because we've had seasons that have been very difficult and, felt isolated from other people and alone and things like that, that we find, that I find when it starts to falter, when it starts to get into trouble or, to where we're not hitting on all eight or, is when I'm being selfish, when I am stepping back and expecting her to move or expecting her to act or expecting something from her. And when I shift my mindset to making certain that I'm serving and whether I want to or not. And my wife, thankfully, I'm so grateful. I call her my low maintenance woman. She is wonderful, but she doesn't take a lot in terms of, I don't have to chase her all the time. I have to do little things, or I want to do little things. And it means a lot to her. She feels loved, in that sense. And everybody's different. You mentioned love languages earlier. So everybody has, different ways that they connect with one another. And I guess it's just being in tune with your wife and knowing, what fulfills her, what from that you can control.
Do you consider yourself like a student of Michelle?
Oh man. Yeah. You've seen wasn't there a meme, a while ago? It's like had a stereo. Okay, guys, this is, going way back too, but like where it had
the book. You looked me up in the book and now, now we're
I
doing
know,
this.
man. What next? Did I just
Right.
make myself irrelevant on this whole show? Okay.
No.
But there's like a switch, and it says, man's brain, switch on and off. And then, below it is, the women's, and there's like all these dials and buttons and switches and lights and stuff. And I've remembered that for forever, that it's kind of like that. And yes, I totally am. And frankly, I love it. I love learning more about her. I've known her for 31 years. And I love getting to know more things. You'd say, gosh, don't you know everything about her? I don't yet.
I love that you said that, man, because there's a lot of us out there that, and I was one of those people too. I was like, well, if I take my wife out on a date, I don't even know what to talk about anymore. Like I remember going through that phase.
Yeah.
And, what you find is that that's a story and a label that I think a lot, and your wife can do the same thing about us, right? That's a story and a label that we put on our spouses. Like, well, I already know everything about them. Like, I remember having a one-on-one coaching client. It's like, I already know everything about her. I was like, really? Do you? I
Yeah.
was like, how old are you? And the client at the time was 42. I was like, let me ask you something. Are you the same guy at 30 that you were at 35? And he's like,
Right.
oh my God, no.
Right.
And I was like, well, what
Yep.
about 35 to 40? Same guy? He's like, no. I was like, what about 40 to 42? He's like, no, I've grown and evolved. I was like, well, is it safe to say she has too? And
Yep.
he's like, well, yeah, of course. I was like, well, then do you really know her, who she is today? Maybe you knew her, well, how she was before, but she's evolved and she's grown and she's, I wouldn't say a different person, but a more evolved person who's grown more and is more aware. And there's different things that maybe she's interested in or she's realized and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Human beings are meant to evolve, right? We're meant to, grow, right? And when we remain stagnant, no human being really wants that, right? And so like when it comes to our wives and when it comes to marriage, like there's no question to get to know someone that's off the table, because I met Jessica when she was 18.
Hmm.
If I ask her, what is something, if we were to fast forward our lives a year from today, what is something that we'd be celebrating that would be so meaningful for you? Like I'm going to get a much different answer at 43 years old where she's at right now versus 18. Right.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think that that's so important for guys to know. And you being married for 30 years, definitely proves that. Question I have for you too, like, let's do this. let's put you in a position and a situation where you call yourself up 31 years ago, right? So I want you to think of John 31 years ago, right before
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah.
And I want you to think about this. Be like, hey, man, this is me. This is you from the future. And 31 years down the road, you've been married to Michelle for 30 years. I want to take you out to dinner, John, and I want to sit you down and I want to give you some advice over what to expect and what to think about as you navigate the next 30 years with Michelle. What would you tell yourself if you're sitting there at dinner with your younger self, about ready to break bread, and you're like, all right, man, listen up. I've got an hour of your time. Here's what you need to hear.
Oh, an hour, man. Seriously. Um, wow. I would tell myself to be bold in my leadership and taking my role as a husband, and that responsibility, taking that to heart immediately. Because we were just talking the other day, because now that my daughter is getting married, we're watching these two kids and we're like, oh my gosh, are they really going to get married? Is this really going to work? And we're trusting that that's going to be the case, and I know it will. But when we were young, we grew together. There was a lot of growing up that we had to do, and so I would try to tell myself to focus on that journey of growing up and taking it seriously, and not that you can't have fun. I mean, gosh, we had a lot of fun, but I bounced a little bit, and I was a carpenter at the time, and where I was going with my career, I took a little extra time because I was still growing up, and I wish I would have been a little more focused back then, and I think that would be encouragement that I give myself.
Yeah, I can. So when you say leadership, um, what what leadership skill set has been most useful for you over the years, and not just with marriage, but let's talk about your kids too.
I'm as a consultant, I come into situations where there are parties who maybe not getting along, and so I try to find, and I'm not always about finding common ground. I'm about finding a pathway to conversation, a pathway to a solution, to an issue. And I think that is just a skill that's just in me, that I've had, and it's worked in my marriage to talk somebody off the ledge, so to speak, or just when emotions are elevated. I'm not afraid to go in and say, listen, let's just dial this back a little bit, and let's break this down and talk about what we need to talk about. And I see that with not only in business but in my family as well. And I think that's been a very important component to just our household and how we've run things.
That's really cool, man. When it comes to leading in your business, what have you seen that's been most effective?
I carry some of that over, for sure, in the business. And when I started it, I wanted to be that face to face. And it's so funny to talk about this now in post COVID world. Here we are on Zoom, and technology is a fantastic thing, but there's something so important about meeting together
Yeah.
and being together, being across the table. And I decided, when I started my business 21 years ago, that I was going to be that guy, if at all possible, to be in your office or to be at that coffee shop, to have that one-on-one, to build that relationship. I'm just a very relational person there, and I think that's really served me well. If I can build trust in a relationship with my client and with other participants in projects, that helps us, really get things done, and just makes for an overall better experience and outcome. So.
That's cool, man. I think that's gotten a little lost a little bit over the years. My kids and I were joking, especially my 16 and 14-year-old, because like this whole like Oculus thing, right? Like this whole metaverse that people are like the kids are like, you can actually like meet like in the metaverse, like hang out with your friends, like with your Oculus goggles on.
Right.
And I was just like, luckily my two oldest boys, we call them the old souls because like Mason, both Ethan and Mason, like we keep a really tight boundary and container around their screen time and their phones and that kind of thing. and like how much time they spend like just sitting around and like on in a virtual world, which both of them don't really like it. In fact, especially my 14-year-old Mason, he plays like you and I did back in the day. So like he has football camp 3 days a week for 2 hours or 3 hours a day. But on his off days and on his camp days, he'll go back to the football field with 12 of his friends and they'll play football for like 2 more hours and like literally like take their shirts off, sweat their rear ends off.
Nice.
You know, they're not, and he never plays video games. Like he never, like he bought an Oculus and then 2 months later he sold it. He's like, this is boring.
Wow.
Like, I just rather be
Cool.
out playing, which I think is cool. Like, and I think that there's been a lot of that that's been lost, you know, over the years, especially these past couple of years. So many people are so used to meeting virtually through screens that you kind of lose that human being, you know, touch point.
Mm.
I want to get to one other topic here. So you mentioned that your daughter is about ready to get married in October.
Yeah.
And the other topic I want to talk to you about too is this whole idea around getting together in person. So like one of the things that you did is you came to this retreat that we hosted in June for our accelerator guys. And I want to talk about that a little bit. But first, before we jump into live events and why those are powerful and being physically in rooms with other people, raising a daughter who's about ready to get married. So what has been some of the most useful things for you over the years, a man raising a daughter, and the lessons that you want to teach, you know, a strong, confident young woman about life, about relationships, about faith? Like what has been some of the things that have really been useful for you over the years with raising a strong young woman?
Yeah. Strong young woman for sure. It was time spent, I think, together. And it's interesting because, you know, Gracie's her name. She was our first, and she was my sidekick. She went a lot of places with me. We have a little farm, and so she was working cattle and riding horses when she was 6 years old. And
Wow.
yeah, my little sidekick all the time. And kind of turned her into a little tomboy, which I frankly, that wasn't even on my radar, man, at all when that was happening. I just thought it was cool to have this little person with me all the time, and I loved
Yeah.
her, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And there is something to the whole daddy's little girl thing that
Yeah.
I didn't realize. You know, I saw kind of some of that with my dad and my sister, but I didn't really understand that. And she's an amazing, grown into an amazing young woman, very strong-willed, very it's really funny because, you know, we Michelle and I were reflecting the other day, both our kids are very strong, independent kids, and you know, that's, everybody says that's what we want to raise, and it's true. But it's funny when you see them you know, gaining that independence and really moving out forward in their, you know, life, and you're like, man, are we just being left behind? And but it's not. It's just the season that's changing right now. And so but you know, bringing up I didn't come from a crying family, right? So we didn't see a lot of tears in my family, and my wife's family was a little more emotional and stuff, and so that was a huge shock for me, because I thought, like, if I saw tears in my house, something was going down. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Something's
that.
up.
It was, yeah, it wasn't just like, you know, the dog threw up in the, you know, whatever. But then when I got married, it was a little different. You know, I had to understand that a little bit more. Dude, that was nothing. That was junior high compared to when your daughter is is getting married and things. You know, there's just so much emotion built up, because it is a big deal. And it's really funny. I've, you know, been talking a little bit to her fiance, and he's a great kid, local, you know, guy here, and they knew each other in a homeschool group years and years ago. But you know, he's like, man, I don't really care. I just want to get married, you know, about the day and all that. And I said, buddy, that's exactly where I was as well. But
Yeah.
you have to, you know, you got to care. It's important. But sorry, did I get off on a rabbit trail there
No.
in terms of, yeah. So
Yeah. So when it comes to like like if you were to give yourself like going back, how old is Gracie?
22, she just turned 22.
22. Okay,
Mhm.
so let's go back 23 years ago. Same thing, right? Take yourself out to dinner and you're like, "All right, man, it's time for the big show. Here comes the first daughter. I'm going to give you some advice, man. Here's some things to look out for along the way." What would you be telling yourself?
I would dial back some of the, I would say, buddy, it's cool to take her in the pickup truck and work cows and do all that stuff, but um, make sure that you're speaking into her in a way that it's okay. She needs to be the princess, and um, she doesn't need to be tough and compete with you. She doesn't need to be, try to um, take on characteristics of a guy to be tough to get your approval. She just can be who she is, and you're gonna love her no matter what. And so that's what I would tell myself.
I had a podcast guest come on not too long ago talking about raising daughters, and he mentioned always aim for her heart,
Mm.
because what a daughter really needs to know is, am I worthy of my dad's heart? What does that mean to you when I say that?
Oh wow, it means a lot. You know, guys, when we're connecting one on one, there's heart connections too, but it's different, right? It's
Yeah.
and you don't think of it when you go into a conversation or into, when you're with other guys. But when it's with, your wife or your daughter, particularly, there's just something that is, your words have so much, you got so much swing with your words, that good or bad, and they will go straight to the heart. They're just a sponge. Where my son, he'll push back on stuff and whatnot. And but when they were both younger, he was kind of like that. But my daughter was just had this, she just absorbed so much. And now I look back and I think, gosh, good and bad, from me. And you just got to be purposeful, because it all does go to the heart. And we tend to, I tend to be hard too, in terms of some of the parenting, right? And it's easy, I think, for my daughter in the past to have taken things personally because of that heart thing, when I was just being a little roughshod and quick and saying, being blunt about something and not taking that heart into consideration. So just be careful, guys, and think about that when you're in your relationship with your daughters.
That advice is gold, man. And I can't, obviously, I don't have any firsthand information when it comes, firsthand experiences, I should say. I have tons of information when it comes to raising a daughter. I just wrote my fourth book, which is The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. My publisher came back and he's like, hey, can you add a few things to the book, like a little bit more stuff to the marriage thing, and a little bit. And he's like, and I want an entire chapter on raising sons, and I want an entire chapter on raising daughters. And I'm like, raising daughters? I was like, I don't know if I'm your guy for that. He's like, no, you're the guy. He's like, you just got to go back to your podcast guests and pick out the ones that's their expertise, right?
Mm.
So I went back and I researched a lot, and a lot of the common themes and that are associated with raising daughters. One of the things too is, I'm gonna throw this one out at you, just because I think it's important for men to realize. But I'm curious about what your thoughts and some of the things you've done over the years. But it's been said several times on this podcast that a woman, a daughter, learns how to be loved by watching her dad love her mom. So over the years, number one, has that been something that you were maybe aware of in the background, even if it was kind of in the background, right? That you knew that maybe she was watching. And number two, what was most meaningful and important for you to love Michelle in a way that your daughter would be like, yeah, that's what I want. Like that's how I want to be loved too.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's excellent observation. So I definitely knew in the back of my mind that, she would be modeling what she saw of her parents and how I loved Michelle, and take that to heart. And so I think it was in a lot of little things. My wife has a servant's heart, and
That's
I
cool.
would say I have a reluctant servant's heart that is, that's been in process for some time, and so just making certain that Gracie would see me um, serving mom Michelle in a way that would maybe be something that was stepping out just a little bit for me, or something along those lines. But what I really wanted was just consistency
Yeah.
in showing how I love my wife. Hmm.
I think that's something so simple yet so overlooked is the
Yeah.
consistency piece, because I think what a lot of our kids, whether you're a daughter or a son, sometimes you see your parents on this roller coaster ride. I know that me growing up, that's what I saw a lot. I mean, there were tons of guys that were in and out of my life that were father figures, but there was always a roller coaster ride. There was never consistency.
Mm.
The consistent thing was the inconsistency. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh man.
I want to get to this topic of, meaningful relationships, getting together physically in person. So, I've been talking about it for the past month. We've got the Dad Edge Summit coming up. And, this is our fourth, should be our fifth Dad Edge Summit. Thank you, COVID in 2020. We had to cancel that one. But I agree with you. I've been to so many conferences myself, whether as a participant or a speaker, where you're in an immersion event, you're shoulder to shoulder, nose to nose, toes to toes with other like-minded people, right? And there's never, there's always something amazing, or several things that are amazing that come out of being together in person at an immersion event where you're not at work and you're not at home, and then you have like these relationships with other like-minded people, whether you've known them for 5 minutes or 5 years. But there are things that come up, right? And there are things that emerge out of these events. But for you, you came to our, I would say, it was definitely our more private event, right? Where we host this for our Dad Edge Accelerator guys that you're a part of, which is our dad business owners. We had you guys out to Colorado in June. We went down to Colorado Springs. We did some hiking. We did some masterminding. We did some experiences. We broke bread. But I personally, I love those things because number one, I think I probably spend 90% of my life on Zoom, which can drive me crazy at times. But number two, there's something to be said around even just being in that environment where you share common visions, goals, interests, strategies, learnings, all these things. And there are some beautiful things that emerge out of these events. But I would love for you to share your experience. And because it sounds like for you, you're just like I am, which I would call myself kind of old school. Like I prefer to be nose to nose, toes to toes at a coffee shop, hanging out with somebody or having a conversation versus virtual.
Yeah, totally. That's you're exactly right. So the experience was amazing. We had some other plans that weekend. I didn't know whether I'd be able to attend, and I can't believe that I even considered. Although it was going to be with my family, which would take priority. But so I got down there early. There's a restaurant we met at the first evening as kind of an optional dinner, and just a couple guys showed up, and I had just seen these guys on Zoom, right, for a few months. I'd only been in Accelerator for a few months. And the coolest thing, Larry, was that we just got a table and just started talking
Yeah.
about real things. Like just real, how's your business? What's going on in your business? How's your family? What's going on in your family? And I'll tell you, the older I get, the less tolerance I have for small talk. Dude, I would rather
Oh
stand
my
up against
God.
the wall and not say anything
I hear
rather
you.
than, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You talk about generative questions and all these things. But man, time is so fleeting. Let's talk about some things of importance and significance. And that was the thing that struck me just right out of the gate was here these guys that I'd not interacted with very much on Zoom, but everybody was very purposeful who came there. One Garrett from London, England
I
flew
know.
in,
Couldn't
right? He was
believe
one of the
that.
he's one of the first guys. I'm sitting here talking to him. I'm like, you're amazing for a weekend. You come that far. But that just set the tone then. And I couldn't wait to meet, as the other guys started coming, just couldn't wait to meet the other guys, to hear more of their story, to get to know more. And I'll tell you, you mentioned mastermind and all, it was fantastic. You guys put on a wonderful program, and it was really engaging and great. But honestly too, the hiking and just the in between times, there was so much connection. After a couple times after the event was over, we all went downstairs in the lobby, and it went on for hours longer. And it was an amazing time of encouragement and challenge. And yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah. It was, what were some things that emerged for you? I mean, maybe in particular that you came back with that maybe were unexpected. I know you left behind a certain thing, and for everybody, which was
Oh,
these handmade, really cool like steak, things that you flip your steak over with, which were really cool, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Takeaway for me, honestly, the big thing, and I think we talked about this on the trail a little bit, was that Zoom calls are one thing, but when you're together, there's something really powerful about guys being together who are all
Agreed.
have a purpose that is, being better fathers, husbands, and business leaders. And it's one thing to say it, and you and I talking about it, but when we hear a group of guys that all come from different backgrounds, different stories, different economic means, it didn't matter. We were all just brothers on the hill, and that was powerful and very encouraging to me, because so many times as business owners and dads and as husbands, we can get isolated. And a lot of times we don't want to ask for help. We don't want, and it's very encouraging to know there's other guys that are going to be real about their issues and real about talking into your life if you'll let them.
Very true, man. And you said something there that I think a lot of guys don't really understand. And that is, when you're in a room physically or virtually with like-minded men or like-minded people, you can go right to those really fantastic conversations. You don't have, I'm the same as you. Like I've been, masterminding and podcasting for 7 years now, and small talk drives me crazy. Like I can't even stand it. Like, how are you? Did you see the game? See what Trump just tweeted out? How are you? Good, fine, busy. Like I can't even stand it. Like I even joke with some of my friends, like when I'm like, hey man, how are things going? Good. I'm like, really? Like good? Tell me what's good. Like tell me, not that I'm challenging them that things are bad, but I'm like, give me give me a different answer than good. Like what is good? Tell me a story, right? And they'd be like, oh man, like things are going really, really good with my kid. We're hanging out, we're doing this, we got this trip coming up, and things are going really, really good with my wife or my business or whatever. Those are the conversations that I think most men want to have, but we don't necessarily have the circle, or we don't necessarily want to be the one to go first to have that conversation, but we all want it. Right.
Yeah. I'd agree. Yep, for sure.
Well, as we wrap up here, let's you and I talk to some of these young bucks here in the audience. And when it comes to, let's talk to the guys out there that are raising kids like under 10, right? There's a lot of those guys who listen to the show. What advice would you give these guys as their sons and daughters are starting to inch their way into the double digit, age ranges and the preteen and the tweens and all that? What advice would you give for guys who are about ready to enter that world?
Oh man, hang on. It's a new chapter, but don't be discouraged. Just be consistent. And it's easy. Like I said before, it's easy for us to get isolated as guys and things aren't going the way. You're going to mess up, and that's okay. Because I'll tell you, kids are resilient. They'll forgive. And, but just don't let that derail you.
Yeah. Amen to that. Fatherhood is, a lot of it is falling on your face at times, you know what I mean? And then the recovery, right? Yep. So, but I think a lot of guys were dead set on, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be right. If not, I'm a failure. I'm this, I'm that. It's this horrible things we say to ourselves. But man, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed this. I want to make sure that if any man, like if you really resonated with John's message whatsoever, or if you feel compelled to connect with him, he's obviously, like I said, you can find him in Dad Edge Accelerator Mastermind. But I want to make sure we point the guys in the direction, if any guy wants to maybe even connect with you outside of this, where's the best place for them to find you?
Being that old school guy, I'm just on LinkedIn, and just hit me up there. Just John Goad, Goad.
There you go, man. There you go.
Yeah, right,
guys. Not to worry, man. We're gonna have all the links in the show notes for you guys. We'll also have a link to the Dad Edge Summit, like I said. So if this really resonated with you and you want to come to our live meetup, our physical event, man, this is, like I said, we do this right. We've been doing it a long time. This should be our 5th year. Unfortunately, it's our 4th. But you can find tickets for the Dad Edge Summit here on October 20th and 21st. You don't have to be a part of the alliance or our community to be a part of it. You can just be a guy in the audience. Head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday64 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday64. John, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was so cool.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Gentlemen, you know what I'm going to say. Go out, live legendary. Take care.